Manipulation is a type of social influence aimed at changing the perception or behavior of others, using devious and deceptive schemes and methods that can also lead to both psychological and physical abuse. Manipulation is not a circumscribed phenomenon, but on the contrary it is present in many areas, from marketing and politics to religion. Persuasive manipulative techniques have very ancient origins. Just think of the Greek people, who thought that acquisition and development of the art of oratory was fundamental. Totalitarian regimes also used manipulation in the past. The fascist government, headed by Benito Mussolini, immediately understood the importance of propaganda, and through modern information tools such as radio and cinema, it bombarded the Italian people with pro-regime speeches and ideologies. Joseph Goebbels, a 20th century politician and journalist, identified several principles within the propaganda by which the regimes managed to manipulate people. We can find among them the principle of simplification and the single enemy, widely used by the Germans against the Jews, and the principle of repetition, which consists of repeating the same concepts over and over again from different points of view. George Orwell addressed the theme of manipulation in his political work 1984 as well. He thought that there was a close link between totalitarian regimes and the corruption of language. According to him, language is of fundamental importance for the human thought because it structures the ideas that individuals are able to formulate and express. Totalitarian regimes have been able to block any thought of rebellion by acting directly on the structure of language. Even Bush used a skillful linguistic manipulation to make people accept the war and occupation of Iraq. He built, together with the British government, fake evidence of Iraq's ties with Al-Qaeda and the September 11 attack. Therefore, the American people, threatened by the president's speech, decided to go to war in the name of fight against terrorism. But how does manipulation work? How is it possible to get people to act in a certain way? Some studies and experiments carried out over the years have shown that all animals, including humans, act according to certain fixed patterns of action, namely some automatic behaviors that are triggered by a certain signal in a certain context. Most of the things we do during the day are regulated by stimulations and unconscious processes. Recent discoveries in scientific psychology have shown that more than 98% of mental activity is made up of dark thought. Childhood memories, emotions, fears, passions, as well as primordial instincts reside in the unconscious. Since our unconscious processes much more data than we are really aware of, it can happen that we get some behavioral patterns from the outside. These patterns can be acquired in two ways, through classical or Pavlovian or operant conditioning. Classical conditioning involves associating an involuntary response and a stimulus, while the operant one is about associating a voluntary behavior and a consequence. The operant conditioning is more complex. Due to this mechanism, men completely or partially change their attitude, as a result of a series of reinforcements, positive or negative, implemented by third parties. Marketing experts, politicians, religious cult leaders, as well as fraudsters, military leaders, and certain types of individuals with psychological problems daily use manipulative techniques to achieve their goals. Marketing experts, as well as politicians, increasingly rely on the mass media to reach a very large number of people. Advertisements, for example, tend to modify the intellectual understanding through the manipulation of images, sounds, and symbols. Consumers are attracted by suggestions that have no concrete logic. Nowadays, television is a real means of distraction of the masses, rather than a means of information. A gigantic kindergarten that entertains the public and distracts it from the problems that afflict contemporary society. Marketing experts mainly focus on consumers' insecurities, fears, and guilt. They make people activate their automatic responses without their knowledge. The professor of psychology and marketing at the Arizona State University, Robert Cialdini, has identified 6 fundamental principles of influence, aimed at discovering which psychological principles influence the tendency to satisfy a demand. In such a complex world, it is almost impossible to stop and think about every single thing. For this reason, human beings very often rely on general mechanisms that reduce the complexity of their decision-making process. These principles are consistency, reciprocity, authority, liking, social proof, and scarcity. Edward Bernays, a well-known American publicist, managed to exploit these principles. In 1928, American Tobacco Society asked him to increase sales. At that time, smoking was a purely male habit. Therefore, Bernays adopted a trick to entice women to buy cigarettes as well. In 1929, Bernays organized the Brigade of Liberties in New York, in which dozens of women marched smoking. The word freedom was associated with the rebellious concept of brigade. In a very short time, people started to think that those who were independent and non-conformist couldn't help smoking. In a few months, Chesterfield, like all other cigarette brands, tripled its sales. According to Jacques Regard, a relational management consultant, it is possible to classify manipulators into three different categories on the grounds of their purposes. The beneficent manipulator, the one who manipulates the individuals for their own good, such as a psychologist or a teacher. The selfish, egocentric manipulator, the one who manipulates others to his own advantage, such as sellers or fraudsters. The malevolent, destructive manipulator, the one who uses manipulation to destroy or make others suffer. According to Regard, it is possible to recognize a manipulator by some of its traits, such as the way of speaking or the way of acting. The manipulator always denies his own mistakes and contradictions. He gets easily annoyed. He avoids an objective and rational confrontation, and he often evokes irrational and suggestive things. Manipulators love morbid, gloomy relationships. They are often bipolar subjects. They can change their attitude in a few seconds or minutes. Some manipulators psychologically annihilate people. They take advantage of their weaknesses. We need to be able to recognize the real purposes of our interlocutors and to find the ambiguities behind them. It is not easy, but it's not even impossible. Manipulation will always exist, but it's up to us to identify and to avoid it in order to be finally free.